Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined this week by not my brother, but Clay Johnson, who is my current neighbor and former IT tech person involved in so many different things. Clay, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Did I cover all the things that you're involved in? I don't think I did, but
Yeah, probably not, but I mean, it's good enough. I'm not that important to need any more titles or
you're on
anything.
this show. You're on this show, so that means like so high of a bar right now. You and I were talking about some of the challenges or obstacles or opportunities that you have coming up in the not too distant future as you plan to relocate overseas. And you and I got talking about, what are the challenges that you might face from a cybersecurity standpoint that you haven't thought about? And, with the current threat landscape, we've seen things like the new DeepSeek AI and the challenges that are just with that alone that aren't even related to whether or not you go international. But one of the things that we did see was Italy, Italy almost right away put out a request as a threat to national security, right? And now we're seeing that even here in the States, there's a bill being submitted that if it passes, it would be criminal to download and use DeepSeek on your own personal devices. So not quite sure how that prosecution might work, but we're pretty sure it was your laptop that downloaded DeepSeek.
Right.
So what are some of the challenges that you are seeing that are of concern, or maybe even the technical challenges that you see that we have more broadly here in the States that aren't necessarily concerns where you plan to go?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, well, really, even just talking about DeepSeek, and different countries, how they try to legislate concerning apps like that, right? So, you recently had in the United States the TikTok ban that lasted for I think almost a full 24 hours, and but really, I think the question becomes is the problem DeepSeek or TikTok or these applications that are taking your data, or is the problem that they're collecting your data and the way they're doing that in the first place? So I don't know, like legislatively in different countries, does it make sense to ban a particular app, or does it make sense to create laws around data privacy, and trying to figure that out? But different countries definitely handle that differently, and so really, yeah, trying to know what sorts of protections you have wherever you are is an important thing that I should probably look up more as to where we're going in Europe, and finding more about those sorts of privacy laws and stuff like that. But yeah, I
Right.
mean, there's a lot of concerns there.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing that comes to mind is if you think about the forcing of the sale of TikTok because it's a potential threat to national security, raises some interesting questions like how does that change what the application inherently is doing with data that it does collect? Like just because it's got a new owner doesn't like was there like some sort of like buffer time, like make sure you go in and change the way in which it sends data to say another country? Or no, as long as it's owned and operated here in the States, we trust it as a legitimate app that any god-fearing American would use.
Right. Yeah. And that is an issue because like I know a lot of people are concerned with just like large corporations with your information and what are they doing with it. I mean, obviously, there are definitely concerns with government actors having,
Sure.
foreign governments having your data is a concern, but it could also be a concern, like the amount of data that Google has on you, right? So,
Sure.
so I think the issue is more broad in when we think about those apps that are concerning and rising up. And the thing is that if we sell TikTok, what do we do about DeepSeek? And then like, what do we do about the next app that comes up that's going to replace those inevitably? That's just how technology works, right? There's going to be a new app that has either similar concerns or new concerns, and how do we be proactive to try to address those issues is I think the better question than just should we ban TikTok or not, like how do we
Well,
actually address the problem?
I'm
Yeah.
using AI myself to build a new app that's a lot like TikTok and RedNote. And what's different about my app is when you install it on your phone and you set up your account, it has some options of like check this box if you like all of your personal information sent to China. Click here for Russia. Click here for, and I've got like 8 or 9 countries that I think are really good choices for us to make good decisions on. There's not an option for none. You have to pick at least one country. And then at the bottom it says, do you
Oh yeah, sure.
understand from this point forward, you no longer will have the ability to buy a car, to get a credit card, and quite honestly, you will probably on somebody's most wanted list and unable to fly even domestically anymore as a result of this amazing app that I just built for you that you didn't even know what the app does, but because everybody promoted it and said it's a great app, you've downloaded it and logged in and plugged all your information in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate having the customization options there,
Sure.
and just really like to personalize it to where I want my data sent. That is a good feature. Yeah, but
Do you think people are going to wake up to that though? Like, I realize I'm not building an app, but like, I think one of the things that I thought was interesting about the TikTok ban is that immediately there was another app called RedNote. I think that was the right name. And the privacy policy was in Mandarin. So I don't know how many of those in America that would go from TikTok to RedNote had Mandarin as one of the languages that they were comfortable reading. I think we're pretty much set up to, we don't read privacy policies anyways. But
right.
what bothered me about it was the generation that's using this app, and I think it's more than one generation really, is that they were more concerned about having access to whatever noise or entertainment that they got from TikTok and a hopes or the calling that maybe this RedNote app would deliver on the same functionality, regardless of what it does with the information it collects about me or my device. Uh, that to me is far more scary than what these apps are capable of doing.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's maybe where government legislation comes in, like I mean, you can't force people to read the privacy policies, and I don't
Right.
think people are going to. But could you make a law around I mean, even just like a highlights, of the privacy policy, because they do tend to be
Sure.
very, very long. And if you're collecting certain types of data, you have to, report that to the user in a different way. Or, yeah, I mean, I don't really know what the solution is to that, but yeah, I do think that definitely having the privacy policy available in a language that the majority of users in the United States are going to understand is probably important for an app that is going to be used largely in the United States. I know it's not exclusively in the United States, but uh, I'm guessing a lot of people
We
on
couldn't do
RedNote
this in
don't
the other direction,
know
right? Like
Mandarin.
you realize like pick a country. Hey, we just put this in the app store and it's going to report back to the US on everything that you do every day. Like
Right.
it just wouldn't be allowed. So I think for me, the thing that I would love to see happen is that I think we need to see this in everything from the K-12 space to adult education around, both from a disclaimer standpoint, like you said, with the privacy policies and that kind of thing, to educating on what is it that you contain on your iPhone or Android phone or fill in the blank. I mean, and I know that you and I are both not on the same ecosystem. You as a Android user, and me as an iPhone user. But what's really interesting that I saw recently in the news, I'd love your thoughts on this, is that um, Zuckerberg went kind of on this like roasting rant about Apple and their lack of innovation and their lack of changes made that are considered to be shiny new or creative. And Well, that's not entirely true. We can probably all go, well, I don't know. We've seen some things come out. I mean, I think more specifically, he was attacking more the iPhone and that operating system. But what's interesting, if you look closely, and I think this is a really exciting thing for all of us, is that Apple has taken the stance of privacy first, and maybe not
Mhm.
privacy on everything. And I'm not saying that Apple's above, collecting information on their customers, but they are causing an entire landscape shift in that because they're introducing privacy first options, advertising as opt-in or opt-out capabilities at the OS and device level, you're directly impacting other companies and other business models who rely very heavily on collecting information about the user, right? Like the browser data, the fill in the blank. And I think that in and of itself is maybe not creative, but it's definitely pushing the envelope on what we give from a standpoint of allowing us to make decisions about what we are willing to share or we are willing to give others access to. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on changing some of that, not to defend Apple because we know they're not perfect.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it is interesting, because Android definitely does not take that approach. Android does put a lot on its users as far as security and kind of, I mean, for like example, being able to install APKs on your Android device,
Sure.
right? Like I can just
Side
go
load.
online and find a random APK and install a sketchy app on
Sure.
my Android device, and that is something that, as far as I know, iPhone it does not allow. Right, you have to get it from the uh, the App Store. So that's something that is kind of beneficial at times that I can get different functionality through APKs online, but it is something that is a huge security risk, and especially when we do talk about banning these apps, like what's to keep somebody from packaging it up, putting it on GitHub or something as an
Right.
APK that I can then put on my Android without going through the App Store. How do we regulate that? And that gets into bigger concerns. So I would say that, yeah, I am still an Android user, but there are certainly some safety concerns that for Apple, that they're not immune to it necessarily,
Sure.
like at like a hardware level, but definitely do have that kind of more privacy and security concerns at the forefront for their end users. And that kind of goes back to me to things like privacy policies. You're not going to get users to read privacy policies. So how do you protect your users at that point? And so being able to, like Apple does, restrict what is like it has to be filtered through our app store in order to
Someone
be on
else
your
is reading the
phone.
policy, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like there is somebody reading the policy, where if I go online and I download an APK, like I'm like there might not even be a privacy policy for it, It's yeah.
And in fairness to that concept around, not judging Android in this context, right? One would argue that in the community of cybersecurity or in the community of IT services, we start talking about Linux, people start talking about like, yeah, it's open source and it's secure and like all of these things start bubbling up about the reasons why one might use Linux. And then you go, but like who built the OS that you're using? Or modified the flavors, or to your point, the apps being deployed on that I can grab through a GET request and it's
Mhm.
just installed. I didn't read a privacy policy. I just hit GET update, GET install, and boom, it's on my machine, right? So I think this goes back to where we started, which is we're not doing a very good job of educating ourselves or those around us on the inherent dangers of blindly using technology. And I think, I mean, going back to when we did Sunday school together many years ago, we had the rotating classes, and I remember doing the one on technology and the
Mhm.
Bible, and it was somewhat a play on words. I wasn't really trying to say that the Bible, because of the Ten Commandments, the first tablet, we could correlate that that's how Apple was inspired to create the current tablet. I think that's a pretty big stretch. But we
Right.
did talk about, like, I think one of the biggest questions that kept coming up in that class was around, protecting our kids from technology. And I kept saying that it's less about just protecting them and more about helping them understand how it works. Like,
Hmm.
well, no, I don't care if this gets on the internet. Like, but you're not really understanding what it means to have that on the internet. Think of it more like, I had to explain this to my kids. Yes, the information that you're sharing is not maybe all of that specific to you, or maybe it's not very valuable. Maybe it was a picture or something that's very benign. But what are the paper trail or breadcrumbs that artifact or that object has attached to it, like metadata, location information? Maybe it's got your email signature or something else attached that you just don't consider to be valuable because it's not important in the way that you think it is to somebody else. And now all of a sudden, I've built an entire profile on you just because of the little pieces over time that you keep sharing out to the world. And when I explain that to them, it's still, frontal lobe still being developed, right? But like they started to understand that there's more to it than just what my friends are doing or what apps my friends use and why won't you let me use that app. And it goes back to that whole, whether it's TikTok or Red Note, like it's not saying I don't want you to be able to use these apps. It's saying that until you can articulate to me what they're going to do with your data, I don't think you should be using those apps. And that's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the important thing to do. Whenever we just if we don't teach them that as far as kids, which my kids are not as old as your kids. I've only got a 2-year-old, so she's not really downloading things from the
Right.
app store just yet. We'll give it a few more months, but
Don't let her get your iPad when you're not looking.
right. But yeah, so if you're trying to prepare them to go out on their own and do this as an adult, you do have to teach them the importance of it, not just it's like, well, I don't want you to use that app, right? Like, why don't I want you to use that app is an important clarification. And I think too, I mean, do you remember Facebook? Like even just like 10 years ago when people were like all their workplaces, their hometown, where they live
Sure.
now, like all of that's just on their Facebook page. And nobody had like, well, maybe 10 years ago they did, but like private pages weren't as common. Like it was all like, I could see where you
Sure,
lived, where
publicly.
you worked,
Yeah.
right? Just shared publicly online. And for most people, like, okay, whatever. Um, but you do have to consider. I mean, if we're talking like cybersecurity, right? Like, that's really good information for like a social engineering attack. To see where you live and where you're from, and I can come up with whatever sorts of connection points to connect with you to social engineer you into creating a security threat. Or if you are someone famous or wealthy or whatever, I can see where you live and I can like narrow that down pretty closely, and that's concerning. Just knowing where you are is kind of a concern. So
Or parents posting like, took my son to set them up for their first bank account, and it's a picture of the bank in the background. And you're like, click, click, click. Okay, I have three things that I now know. I
right.
had this the other day, and you see this a lot with older people. They'll set up their free Gmail or Yahoo or whatever address, and it'll be like, whatever the name is, but instead of it being the random number that might get generated because there's a bajillion, Clay Johnsons, it's
Hmm.
like their date of birth or
Right.
their anniversary or any number of things. And I actually had a conversation with someone about that the other day, and they're like, I don't understand what the big deal is. I'm like, I figured out your Facebook profile, where you live, and what you do solely because you added that date to your name.
Hmm.
I didn't have enough information to go on because when I pulled it up without that information, I had like 15 to choose from. So yes, it could have still been narrowed down, but I mean, like, I didn't have to do any narrowing because you gave me all the information I need. And remember, when you think about the threat surface, the threat landscape, they're not looking for what's the most complicated vault to break into. They're looking for what vault just has the door open and I can see how much money's inside.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is that it's about most attacks, right, are not super sophisticated. Um, I also enjoy like lock picking and stuff like that on the side, just for fun, my own locks, But like
They're called
that
puzzles if you're not a hacker.
right. But that's the thing that they'll talk about in lock picking is like you can get a very complicated lock, but the easiest way past the lock is to just try to bypass it, right? So like if I can just like bypass the lock, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to sit there and pick every pin if there's a bypass option. So, and that's the same whenever we're talking about
Have you heard of
technology.
cable cutters?
Right, exactly that too. So if we're talking about that, like in a, bike locks, the like the you can have a really good lock, but if your chain is, I can just cut through it. That's what I'm going to do. It's just looking for the easiest point of entry, and that's the
Yeah.
same thing here. It's like if it's the easier it is, that's what I'm going to go for. I'm not going to try to break into Fort Knox if I can, get around it.
Well, yeah, I saw a commercial the other day for Simply Safe, and it was funny. It's two Rottweilers talking to each other over the fence, and you can see in the background the bad guys going up to the front door, and then it says, "This is Simply Safe. You're something about intruders," and the dog to the other dog is like, "Man, I didn't even see them get all the way through the yard. That's amazing." And it's funny, but the reality was whether they have that security system or not, the scare tactics of having an audio voice come through that camera, regardless of what it might be linked to, if it's recording footage or not, that's a deterrent, right? Like seeing a sign in someone's yard is a deterrent. And I think that's an interesting challenge, is that sometimes it's also the security method that is the simplest, might be the biggest deterrent. Or it could also be what attracts the bad guys. I mean, we all remember the club for the car, right? Like, you slide it in place and you can't turn the steering wheel. Like, but for $10 they can get a hacksaw and it takes care of that problematic lock. So
Right.
yeah, I'm just curious, as you're thinking about your travels that are coming, are there anything that you would recommend to someone who's going to do live abroad, or maybe is just traveling abroad from a security standpoint, that you didn't think about prior to planning international travel?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing is that it might be a little bit differently if you're kind of going, and maybe it's like more important in some ways if you're going to a very touristy place. Where I'm going, there's not a large expat community. There's not a lot of tourists there. So one thing that we were advised of, and not to be like conspiratorial, but like the government is going to do some sort of like surveillance on you. So like there's not necessarily anything you need to do about that other than just be aware of it. But
Sure.
yeah, I think public networks, especially I've been in some countries in Asia where if you wanted Wi-Fi, you went to like a Wi-Fi cafe, right? And that was your only
Yeah.
option to get on the internet. That was a while ago, but that like there are countries where that's still very popular. And so just
Sure.
using things, I mean, much like in the US, right? But like VPNs are helpful in that. And again, like that's not saying that they can't get around that somehow, but like we said earlier about the ease of finding your data and accessing it and making it harder. It's like if you are a harder target, then they'll go after an easier one. So
Sure.
things like that. I think also accessing secure information on an unsecure if you're using your neighbor's Wi-Fi or at a cafe or something like that. Again, making sure you're on a VPN or just like not accessing things like your bank, or if you are, working, like maybe not get on your work's server or whatever from a
Sure.
public domain. Just things like that I think are fairly simple and that we probably should be practicing even stateside, but just kind of to a heightened degree in a lot of countries. Are just kind of more of a concern. But
I always kind of cruise Amazon for this, like looking for, and I'll search with terms like secure phone. Like somehow there's magically going to be one that's like already locked down. And surprisingly, there are a couple devices that have come up that are pretty locked down. Like the does not do a whole lot. It doesn't give you
mhm.
the smartphone functionality like you would traditionally get. It does two things well. You can use it as a hotspot, and you can use it to make a phone call.
Yeah,
Maybe there's some texting built in, but largely they're very limited devices. But at the same time, it also gives you the ability to really create that secure connectivity line that you may not have if you're relying on a phone that has say Google Wi-Fi as opposed to an actual cellular connection, which that in and of itself is not a secure means necessarily, but it is more secure than just having it connect to the local Wi-Fi hotspot that everybody else is connected to, and there's really no encrypted traffic unless you
Right.
intentionally encrypt it.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's again like a concern going back to those apps that we have,
Sure.
and I think maybe even especially overseas, like looking into what sorts of protections there are there, because and again, like those APKs, or if you're getting apps in a foreign language, making sure that you are able to either read the privacy policy or
Right.
whatever to make sure you're not just opening yourself up like on a public network to having your data easily accessible or taken.
We've talked about devices or secure devices. We've talked about apps and the challenges there. What have you seen, or what are you, from a browser standpoint, which is essentially today its own operating system, and then you install extensions that today are more an application than they are just an extension. They do lots of things in a very small package. Are you seeing that, as I would imagine that internationally, you're not necessarily being exposed to the same uh, browser store for extensions or plugins. So going back to what you said about making sure you read a privacy policy or understand what that app's going to do, I would think this would make it even more complicated than that with that which isn't just an app.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I tend to not use a lot of plugins because of that. Like if there is
Sure.
I use a password manager, and so I do use my password manager's plugin. It's very convenient and also kind of the only way to use a password manager with the browser. So, I mean, I guess you could go into your password vault and copy and paste, but that takes a long time. So I use that, and that's I think probably the only plugin that I'm using right now. And my primary browser is Firefox. So I also don't have like there's settings there. So if I close out of Firefox, it kind of erases all of my history and cookies and all of that stuff. So, which is kind of obnoxious because if I go back to a web page, it does not remember that I've been there, and I have to log in again, right? So every time I open up my Gmail, I have to log in. But
Yeah, I can relate to
that's
that.
again right, yeah. But that's again, I do that for that just added level of security, and just I would rather log in again than be insecure. That's not a huge deal for me. So
Yeah, I was when I reset up my profile on my new machine, that was one of the things that I recognized was that I had some things like in Edge that I had never cleared the cache in probably 2 years. And not that that's necessarily the end of the world, but to your point, why create a treasure trove when it's more inconvenient than a it's just an inconvenience, right? It's not taking away my ability to get things done. And password managers have gotten pretty sophisticated. So like I can, instead of typing in the browser the website that I want to go to, I can use my vault and just say, launch and log in,
right,
which quite honestly, that was really the only reason I was leaving stuff cached in browser was to skip that step, which is
right,
really not a big skip, right? I still
yeah.
had to go to the website before.
Right, yeah, and I would say that a big concern when it comes to browsers, as much as like I don't have a problem with Google Chrome, it's a perfectly fine browser. A lot of people use it, but when people are saving their passwords in Google Chrome and also staying logged into Google Chrome on all of their devices, like to me that just freaks me out. Like if I were to get into your phone, I now have the password to your bank. That to me seems like a really big security risk, and then especially overseas in the U.S. pickpocketing is not as common, especially here where you and I are. It's a little bit more rural. We're not getting pickpocketed every day, but overseas that tends to be more of a concern. And so, yeah, like if I pickpocket your phone and I'm able to get into Google Chrome where you're still logged in and I have all your
Yeah.
passwords, then that's
I,
a really big security concern.
I have problems with that with extensions for password vaults where they maintain the authenticated vault is open until
Yeah,
you actually either close the browser or log out. That bothers me because I think, yeah, it's convenient, but then again, if someone were to compromise my browser session, um, if there's no inactivity timeout for the password vault, then that password vault is just as vulnerable as it was to have my browser manage my passwords.
right, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And that's, I mean, there are a lot of good options out there for password managers. There's a lot of good free password managers out there that I think are worth using. But even if you want a paid one for different sorts of features or whatever, like I think it's worth it, And I think if you're currently using Google, this is something I would suggest. You can export all that data and import it into a password manager and then delete it from Google. That's just my or whatever browser you're using to manage your
Yeah.
passwords. I would not use a browser-based password manager, and that kind of goes again for whether you're in the States or abroad. I would prefer something more secure than that. But
Well, there you have it. For those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week. So